Hi everyone. Here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Slauson Malone 1 project, Excelsior. New project from California music producer, composer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, Slauson Malone, a versatile artist whose first album back in 2019 was one of the most mind-bending musical experiences I had that year. The way he somehow made abstract hip-hop, sound collages, ambient music, and acoustic touches work together in harmony. It was just something to behold. He even flirted with more folky and pop aesthetics on the EP he followed that up with the next year. In a very short amount of time, Malone, or Jasper Armstrong Marsalis, son of trumpet player Wynton Marsalis, was, for me, one of the most exciting and promising young producers out there. But the funny thing is, even though I was excited for this project, I had no earthly idea as to what it would sound like, where it would go, because I think assuming that Malone would go into this project working with pretty much the same hip-hop flavors he did on his first record, that would be foolish. Nor did I think he'd snugly fall in line with the tradition of electronic music that Warp Records is known for. And even the handful of teasers we heard before this record came out covered some unexpected bases. New Joy, for example, was this really vague, moody indie rock pastiche with a lot of reverb on it, some understated vocals, and very crunchy guitars. Kind of sounds like several things from back in the day that I kind of lost memory of because they weren't that standout. I'm really more enamored with the surreal effects that surround the song than the song itself. There was also Half-Life, which sounds like the sad, dejected guitar musings of a UK singer-songwriter along the lines of Archie Marshall, King Cruel, though not quite as bold, sadly. Then there's also Voyager, which I think has a vibe similar to Half-Life, but also hits with all these subtle psychedelic sonics, glitches in the matrix popping up almost at random. Mind you, they do fit into the groove of the song overall, but they also come on so quickly and don't last very long. Like in one moment where there's suddenly a horn section. And the song kind of ends out of nowhere because, of course it does. When you listen to this LP, you learn very quickly that Slauson Malone is not dictated by a bias toward traditional song structures. And maybe here is where I'll merge into one of my prime complaints with this project, that there's so little cohesion and development on key moments of Excelsior, as in the track list of this project, Slauson is conjuring up a lot of interesting snapshots and sketches. Great sound palettes, like on the spooky opener, The Weather, which sounds like an early version of Animal Collective performing a satanic ritual. Then there's also house music, which feels like if you took the same song and flipped it into an experimental, glitchy beat music piece. Meanwhile, Undercommons is this loose, lazy waltz whose bass and keys kind of melt before your ears. That is before they turn into a Twin Peaks-style nightmare, with more instrumental and vocal layers blossoming on the following track, Old Joy. And that's one thing I can give Slauson Malone, even if there's not a lot of super detailed development on many of these tracks on an individual level, there is a reinforcement going on between some of the songs here, clear segues or compositional connections. One piece will move on but carry maybe a little bit of the previous track with it and change that into something else. Like the opening keyboard melodies on Voyager and how they borrow from a piano melody on the previous track, Destroyer X, or even in the way some of the vocal harmonies and melodies on Voyager get used in a different context on Challenger more than a track later. During interestingly self-referential moments like these, I think is where the record is really at its best. Makes the album feel kind of like a puzzle block that I'm slowly figuring out, pulling apart. And keep in mind, even though I've given this record quite a few listens through at this point and feel confident enough to review it and say what I do and don't like about it, there are most likely still aspects of this album and weird hidden Easter eggs and layers that I haven't even picked up on yet. I mean, as of this moment, admittedly, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of some of the lyrics here. A lot of them at first glance read as very absurd, maybe even silly, but this just may be a means of covering up various throughways and kind of like back roads that connect various parts of this record on a lyrical level too. But as I was getting to earlier, there are quite a few songs on this thing that are not super long or well developed musically, so it helps quite a bit to feel like there are numerous moments across the album that segue into each other, reinforce each other. So even if a track is short, there is some kind of like connection to the next moment. A momentum that was built up during one track is kind of carried over into the next. But even though this is a great aspect of the album, it's not always consistent. Some of the tracks here, no matter how much I revisit them, just kind of feel like random detours or flashes in the pan, be it with a glitchy orchestral freakout, a whispered spoken word piece, or maybe even an overly long drum roll. And look, some of that stuff is here because this record is experimental, legitimately experimental. But I think Excelsior reminds me that something being experimental doesn't necessarily mean it has to feel unfocused. And look, to this album's credit, there are some moments that Slauson actually builds up into what feels like a fully fledged song. Be that on I Hear a New World, which sounds like one of the kookier ballads from Zappa's Freak Out era, for example, but if it were meant to be a lullaby that's supposed to turn violent mental patients to sleep. There's also No GEIGER Dub, which is a spacey bass synth-backed reggae cut that feels like a lost psych fusion gem from the 70s, which I know hearing me say that sounds like it makes no sense, but once you hear it, you'll know what the hell I'm talking about. And even Voyager, which has its moments I wish lasted a bit longer, does sound better shoulder to shoulder with other tracks on the record that reinforce it, build up to it, borrow from it, and develop further. And generally, I will say the cohesion track to track on this LP is a lot better and clear in the second half than it is the first. And I think Slauson, in a funny way, nails the landing on the record too, with the very short Us, Tower of Love, which is this beautiful ascending acoustic piece with building strings over it. And it unfolds in a way, pace-wise, that feels like it should be really beautiful and elegant, but as it progresses, the instrumentation gets more sloppy and dissonant and hideous. It's kind of this very silly rug pull at the very end of the album that not only shows off Slauson Malone's compositional chops, but also, you know, that he just has a sense of humor about what he does. Still, though, that doesn't change the fact that there are some tracks, there are some moments that I wish lasted longer, that I wish segued into each other in a more clear and sensible way. Some of the tracks that have more of a straightforward indie rock palette, in my opinion, do run a bit plain. But with all of that being said, I found the vast majority of this project to be intriguing, to be moving, to be highly replayable. I mean, really like an onion that you can continue to pull layers back on over and over and over forever. And even if this is not my favorite project Malone has done so far, I still think this record confirms that the talent that was so obviously there on the first record was not a fluke, and that Marsalis is in fact a boundary-pushing producer who really could just be at the start of what may very well be a long and exciting career. I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on this one. Tran, Zishin, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Slauson Malone. Forever.